I was born in a cabin up a canyon kind of there.
Wow.
We have a wood burning stove for heat. My mom chopped wood,
Wow.
and she met a Mormon family that was just very nice to her.
Yeah.
Um, and she went to church, and it was, she says it's really the first time she really felt accepted. And
Wow.
then the missionaries came around, and a few years later we came to Utah.
So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's the correct Mormon is, the shorthand. My understanding is though that the LDS Church really doesn't like the term Mormon. Is that right? Or
Yeah, I think so
well,
too. I see those things too, but it's I mean, even people here, that are very active, I think still use the term Mormon.
a lot easier to say Mormon than it is Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, exactly.
But and so there is my perspective, and I think this is right. There is a massive chasm of difference between the LDS Church and the People's Temple. And but just listening to what you're saying, tell me what you think, because we're talking about your mom, her conversion to the LDS Church, and then basically she moves to a different place in association with that church. Then we talk about your aunt. It's very interesting, something you wrote. The person you knew is Linda Silverstein, right? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes.
Linda Silverstein. Known to me always, I'd never heard of Linda Silverstein. I'd only heard of Sharon Amos. But then we talk about your aunt, and it sounds like there are some similar things. She finds a community where she finds a sense of meaning, and before long, she has moved to a very different place. Do you think there's something to this parallel? Have you noticed this parallel in your own thinking about it?
No, you're giving me goosebumps right now. I mean, there's so many dots to connect, and and that they are starting to come together. But no, you just saying that is the first time I've really thought of it in that way.
Does it make sense?
Yes, absolutely. It there's a long trend. I think my family history is Jewish. My last name is a traditionally Jewish last name. I have my mom's last name. I never knew my dad. I know who he is now, but he's passed. And when you look back, they came from Eastern Europe, and it was just so unstable. This would be early 1900s. And it's just this track of survival. And, I guess it's just a thought I have, or an idea or concept about it. But, when you're trying really, really hard to survive and maybe overcome, a lot of the challenges that were handed to you generationally, there's maybe also sometimes a drive to find meaning, kind of what's behind all this madness, and where's it heading. And no, it's just my mom's life was, she describes it herself. It was just survival, trying to get through. And she got by on very little, but was always working to just try to be a good person. And I think when she found the LDS Church, I think it really gave her a kind of a model to follow.
Was she within, and I say this saying, I'm sure there are Mormons, I'll just use that phrase, understanding some people don't like it, but, or there are people within the LDS Church. I'm sure there are people within the LDS Church who are not nice people, but I've never met one. Every LDS person I've known has been a pretty nice person, So I'm imagining your mom in that context. And so when I ask this question, there's no animus behind it. In fact, I've told my wife I'd be perfectly glad to live in a neighborhood where we were the only non-LDS people there, because of my experience with them as people. Within the church, would you describe your mom as was it kind of a nominal thing, like this is who I am and I come to church? Or, was there a high level of commitment?
Definitely a high level of commitment, especially when we were young. I think, it was just her, raising us as a single mom, and the resources within the church to give you, like I described it a minute ago, kind of a model to follow, a worldview to give to your kids, and to lean into that. You talked about, how LDS people are usually very kind. I always had, in our church, in our ward, that's kind of the local community. There'd always be, youth leaders, friends, parents, that really took me under their wing. I ate dinner, all the time, at a friend's house. And,
Yeah.
a lot of times they just treated me like their own kid. So, and then, we have like home teachers. There's, usually two men in the ward that are kind of assigned to you as your family, but it doesn't, it usually doesn't feel like an assignment. It feels like, they're looking out for you. And,
Yeah.
Sometimes there was times my mom had to call them because, she was tiny. She's 5 feet tall. And as me and my brother got a little bit older, we weren't physically, at odds with her, but I think, sometimes she needed to have a man come over and, kind of tell us how it was going to be, for better or for worse, but I can see why she did it. So yeah, she leaned in hard. We couldn't drink caffeine at all.
Yeah.
I remember I'd have to go to a friend's house. That was she'd make that allowance to let me go to a friend's house to watch the Super Bowl, since it was on Sunday and we didn't watch sports on Sunday.
Yeah.
She would, she'd make breakfast for me and my brother every morning, and a really nice, breakfast with, eggs and bacon and things like that, because she'd read to us from the Book of Mormon while we ate. So yeah, definitely. She was very committed to it, for sure.
So, okay. So I don't want to push the similarities too far, because clearly your mom's experience is worlds removed from your aunt. And so we'll head there. But it just, I am noticing those similar themes once again. Kind of, you're in California, feeling kind of lost. You find a community where you feel accepted, because of the Jewish heritage, the Jewish ethnicity. What had happened in World War II, which of course is much closer to them in time than it is to us. Whatever comes along with that. And so now you're in this community that's accepting, that's loving, and you become very committed to it. And then for the sake of that movement, you move to a different place. You transplant yourself to a different place. Your mom's very committed. Now your aunt, of course, is unfortunately, in a negative sense, sort of the model of commitment, the person who will, who takes a level of commitment. The commitment that your mom showed, I think a lot of people, just what little I've heard, a lot of people would describe that as admirable, whatever they think about the particular theological views, but they may say, well, that's admirable to have these kinds of commitments. And I value that. The kind of commitment that your aunt showed, of course, November 18, 1978, that's a completely different world. So let's move there. I was really interested. I read this essay that you wrote, and you said, I grew up with an awareness that my Aunt Silverstein apparently died with her 3 children. And then you find out that, after some time of research, you find out that your Aunt Linda, to most people who know who she was, her name was Sharon Amos.
Right.
And then as the essay goes, you say that Linda, I think this is a very interesting passage. You say, Linda is my aunt and Sharon is a villain. Yeah. So just kind of plopping that out there, I mean, what thoughts and, just how do you react to hearing those words read back to you?
Yeah, I think, just to go back to maybe the first part of your question is, I think my mom's understanding of it was not complete. And I don't know if that was, outsiders protecting her, herself protecting herself, or the way that she was trying to explain that, it's unavoidable. We didn't have really any extended family. So maybe she felt like she had to say something to us, but didn't, really give the full story. But even reading her memoir, she describes her sister Linda as being murdered with her 3 kids. And, being a little kid, that sounds scary. Maybe you don't ask a lot of follow-up questions. And I'd always assumed that this happened in California. I think my mom had described it to me as a meeting. And this probably sounds really strange to outsiders that come at it from the other side of it, right? Of, knowing who Sharon Amos is, and then, they're going back to the real name Linda and who that was. As far as the aunt and the villain, there's probably something deeper there. But when I write about it, emailing you in preparation for this, I have this, I feel weird admitting this, but I feel like when I describe what happened in the People's Temple, what happened in Georgetown and in Guyana, my instinct is to use the name Sharon. But when I describe my mom's sister and growing up, and I look at pictures, I see Linda. And, I guess a lot of that just comes back to my own personal views on, not to excuse the bad that people do, but even, really bad people are still human and they have a human side to them. And we don't understand what their motivations are. That right there is probably one of the reasons that drives me to research this more. Is it's hard to try to understand what she was thinking and how she could have done what she did. But knowing that it's complex makes me want to try to get more details, talk to people that knew her or read different perspectives on it. If you don't mind me sharing one other little thing, is so Stephen Jones, this is a very complicated story, but Stephen Jones, Jim Jones' son, was in Georgetown on November 18th. And he wrote an essay about that day. It's on the Jonestown Remembrance site on San Diego State's website. And he talks a lot about this. And, I've read it a few times. It's pretty difficult to read. I think it'd be difficult for anybody to read, children and, murder and everything. But he talks about the time frame of when the calls first started coming into Georgetown from Jim Jones and the Jonestown part of the group. And I just caught this the other night reading. He said that she sat on the radio listening to the horrors, and picturing her in that moment. I've never listened to the tapes, by the way. I don't know if I can bring myself to do that, even though my family was in Georgetown, away from that. But for her to sit and listen to that, I see people on the internet that describe listening to those tapes. And, this is today's terminology, but if she was live streaming that, the mindset to be able to do that, and then, just the chaos that must have been in her mind at that point, and, the orders that she got from Jim Jones, a long history of being in that group. And You described the commitment that she had to it. I don't shy away from the word. She's typically described as a zealot. That's a very common word. So, I think we're getting pretty far from your question here, but
no.
It just, that what was in her head is just, I don't think anybody will ever understand it, but
Yeah, I think, I mean, you can get to a certain place, and then there's just a level of understanding that's not there. Your mom told you that your Aunt Linda and her 3 children were murdered. Now, early news reports said that, this fellow Bikeman, do I have the first name? Is it Thomas? Yeah. No, Thomas Bikeman is Charles Bikeman is the father, right?
Right.
The allegation was, because he was there, no one denies that. And so Charles Bikeman is there. He's I believe a 43-year-old man who's been in the People's Temple for about 20 years. He's on the scene. He's in the house with your aunt, with the children. And the allegation is that the mortal wounds, the mortal wounds on Sharon and then on Sharon's oldest daughter, is that right? Is it Leon? Is that the name? That they could not have been self-inflicted. And my understanding is so the allegation is that Charles Bikeman, participated in their murder. It appears that as investigation went on, as more information was gathered, that he was not pegged with their murder. He served 5 years in prison in Guyana. In your own mind, do you feel comfortable with the judgment that, I mean, this is awful, but that Sharon Amos was responsible for the death of herself and her 3 children, and that Charles Bikeman was not immediately involved in that?
Yeah, 100% of what you just said. I've talked to people a little bit that knew Charles. It's been several years, and I mean very short conversations.
Yeah.
And they describe him as not being, like a leader in the People's Temple. He was, maybe kind of there as I picture him like a utility, like he could kind of serve a lot of different purposes.
I think so.
And Sharon, on the other hand, is not described that way. She was a very intelligent, very capable woman. And in fact, going back to the essay that Stephen wrote, and I'm forgetting the name here, but one of the other guys that was there in Georgetown on the basketball team, Jim, maybe, he'd asked Jim to keep an eye on Sharon. And so I think that also speaks to what you're talking about, that, she's not there as a victim, just, going through the motions. She's driving things.
And if she is, what I've read of her, and tell me if you think this is right, but it does, I mean, if I remember right, you said that your mom was pretty short in stature. I think Sharon was as well, right? But kind of one of those forces of nature, right? I mean, I think very much kind of a human force. And if Charles Bikeman, I think if my memory serves me correctly, he was one of the early People's Temple folks to go down and to help to build Jonestown and all that. So very much a hands-on blue-collar guy. I know that he was not able to read the letters that came from him in the prison where, he spoke them and someone else wrote them. So, I mean, because the obvious question is, well, why didn't this man who was there, why didn't he step in and stop this? And maybe you've just got some psychological thing that physically he would have been capable of stopping it, probably. But if she was kind of this, this force, then psychologically maybe you could understand how he would just kind of, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was another little girl that was in that scene as well, in that bathroom when it happened.
Yeah.
So let's see, if I counted up, I think there were 6 total people that were in that bathroom. And then Thomas, who is how I found you, I watched his video on YouTube. Charles' son was sitting outside the room. So the other little girl, I'm probably going to get this wrong. I think her name was Stephanie.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And it seems that Sharon gave him the order to kill her as well in that same fashion with the knife. And he, I guess when she was found, there was some wounds on her neck, but very, very shallow wounds. So the way I've interpreted that is that in that moment, that was what he could do, was he could try to save that little girl's life.
And I think he's quoted in one of the news articles saying that he kind of intentionally, he did what he was told. So that again points to the authority that Sharon had. He did what he was told, but not to the extent that it actually, end this little girl's life.
Right.
Yeah. I've been meeting with a couple guys who've been talking about a project, and both of them in the past couple weeks have used the phrase, not speaking of Jonestown, but have used the phrase, which has just gotten into colloquial English now, drinking the Kool-Aid, right? I'm sure you hear that phrase. You hear it a lot. Does that phrase always make you pause for a second, or?
It does. It doesn't, I'm not offended when people say it, and I understand the meaning. And I even think that if you're able to take it and dig into it a little bit and understand really where it comes from, that it could serve a purpose, in your life. And, in the world, we see, a lot of political turmoil and things like that. I do think that it's unfortunate that I think most people have no idea where it comes from. I have a buddy, close friend, former coworker, and I shared that with him. And I talked to him last week, and he was talking with one of his current coworkers, and they used the term, and so I can see how that's in his head, that he gets what you and I are talking about right now, and it shows me that people probably could see some more depth in that. But that he brought that up with me, and he's, just to say it is, the term's out there, but I don't think people realize, just how deep and dark and what the real meaning is.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the things I'm interested in, because you're not directly involved in the story. I mean, you didn't even know that your Aunt Linda was there.
Right.
What are the implications of, but so on the one hand, you're very separated from this, and that, you don't have any personal involvement. Have you, I'm guessing you haven't been to Guyana before, and, so you haven't been to Guyana, and, and in that respect, you're very far removed from it. And in time, we're quite removed from it, several decades now. But obviously, this is a topic that is very much on your mind, and at least at times, and you're spending time. What is it that's what do you think it is for you that kind of drives you to learn as much as you can and to try to figure out as much as you can about it, understanding that you're going to get to a place where it's just not possible to go beyond, because you can't get into another person's mind or soul? What is it that has motivated you to do the research you've done, to look up folks who knew Sharon, and et cetera?
I don't want to say like I've had a difficult life. I've had a nice life. My mom was very kind and very loving to us. She probably just her childhood and how she was raised. She didn't really have a good playbook, so she was doing the best that she could.
Mm-hmm.
In my lifetime, I've tried to work hard and, overcome challenges and everything. But I think there's something about, I'm 42, you start to, I've got kids, you start to look a little bit more at what are the factors that are feeding into your experience. So I think that that's definitely a part of it. I kind of want to say that just to recognize it. What drives me at this point is really the kids, my cousins, Leanne and Martin and Krista, especially the younger ones. Krista was 10 and Martin was 9. They, their history, I don't even have a lot, prior to People's Temple, but it seems like they came in really, really young. They probably don't remember anything else.
These are Sharon's children who died in Guyana. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just, I think they probably had a lot of interesting things that they did. They'd go and do projects and things when they were in California. I read, I don't remember if I'd read it before, but I recently read one of the first letters that Leanne wrote back to a friend in California in the People's Temple.
Wow.
And she seemed pretty happy about being in Georgetown. It was an interesting place, driving on the other side of the road and the food and just the experience. But, those kids, that's a rough life, to be 9 or 10 years old. And that's the life that, Martin, there's stories of Martin being subject to some of the extreme discipline. And then the way that they died at the hand of their own mother is just, I can't imagine a more difficult experience. When I look at the pictures of them, Leanne, they're mixed. They were mixed race. Their dad was African American, but they look so much like my older sister and my older brother when they were young, and there's just something strange about that. Now I'm forgetting your original question.
Well, let me ask this one. What was that like for you? I mean, you'd known since you were a kid that, something horrible had happened in the family and that your Aunt Linda and her 3 children had been murdered. What was that like when you discovered that your Aunt Linda, so far as most people knew, was Sharon Amos, and then all of a sudden you attach her? I mean, had you, before finding out that Linda to most of us is Sharon, did you even know what the People's Temple was, what Jonestown was?
Just vaguely. My mom had used the word Jonestown. She had told me, when I was fairly young, that she had met Jim Jones, I think on a couple occasions. But we didn't have pictures. We didn't know much about it. The stories my mom told from her childhood with Linda, Sharon, didn't make Linda seem like a very nice sibling. Like she locked my mom in the cabinets like for hours because my mom wanted to go play, and it's kind of sibling stuff, but
Yeah,
a little extreme.
maybe something a little sinister there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and she just always really felt like Linda hated her. And she, Linda, I think, excelled in school. I think she had a master's degree or was working on a master's degree from Berkeley. On the flip side, my mom's experience with school was just really rough. And so I think it was just a place she didn't like to go to and talk about a lot. But over the years, and as, the internet, came up through my lifetime, I'd Google the name, and nothing ever came up. And I think just as the internet continued to advance, this one night about 5 years ago, I searched the name and it came up on, there's like a website for finding a grave or something along those lines. And it had the alias there, Sharon Amos. And so from that point, that's copy paste. That's 3 seconds, to copy and paste that in. And I stayed up all night reading about it. And, it's like this mix of fascination and horror all at the same time.
What was that like? I mean, there must have been a particular, there must have been a moment when, to use the phrase, the light goes on. That's probably not the best phrase, but wow. I mean, so Linda is Sharon, and this is what Sharon did on November 8, 1978. Speaking of the inexplicable to someone who isn't in your shoes, but what words would you use to describe that moment when you finally, realized what this was all about?
It still feels very surreal.
Yeah.
But I think this term gets used in a positive sense usually, but I can't think of a better term. It was like a rush. It was just this rush of, wow, look how much there is now. I had an interest, obviously, as I kept Googling, and it was always so frustrating that there was nothing, and
how could the murder of a mom and 3 kids not be in the news, right? That's kind of the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you find Sharon Amos, then of course there's a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where did
the mix? Sorry?
Where did the name Sharon Amos come from anyway? Why?
So Amos, this is my understanding. So Amos is the father of Martin and Krista, and it does seem like they were married, Linda, and I think it was actually Linda Amos originally. They were married, they split up, and then it seems like that's when she joined the People's Temple. I don't know how well documented this is, but it seems like Jim Jones hated the name Linda. He just hated the name, and he told her that she was gonna, from that point forward, go by Sharon.
Wow, and so that explains it. So, trying to think about how to formulate this question. I've heard people speak about this kind of thing, having this kind of thing in the family, right? And so you've got this, all families are messed up, but then you've kind of got these experiences. And I've heard people speak about kind of I don't know what the right word is, but a sense of just sort of a nagging feeling, since we're talking family, a nagging feeling that whatever drove, that family member to do that is something of that in me. Has that ever, do you resonate with that at all? Like folks who, it's not just like, oh, we've got this rough thing in the family, but I'm worried about the implications of that for me as a person. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you at all or not?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it. I look at it more, as even further back, right? What were the factors that were influencing, my grandparents and their parents and things like that? And how did that filter down into my mom and Linda and then into me? When I was really young, I was very strong-willed. I was very vocal. And I actually just read it earlier today. I was going back through just trying to refresh my memory about, Martin, Krista, Leanne, and wanting to represent them as best as I could, even though I don't know them well. And there's another essay written by Don Beck, I think is his name. He was the kindergarten teacher. And he describes Martin as being very strong-willed, If there was something he wanted, he was going to figure out a way to make it happen. And, it's not okay to go through the world that way. You have to, you have to polish your edges and, things like that. But you also feel that there's things that seem like they're deep, it's deep and you don't know how to access it. And, even when you try not to, I love to debate, it's like if a friend wants to debate politics or something, to me, that's like bringing the basketball to the court and I get going. And, a lot of times really close friends, they know how to just kind of roll with it. And I check myself, but then I drive home like a lot of us do, and you're in your head, why'd I do or say that? And I keep trying to work on it and get there. But I guess I understand your question. I do relate to it, but it's just a little different. I don't think that it's necessarily, and I know this isn't what you're saying, but it's not necessarily like a drive for evil or hurting your children or anything like that. But there's just something that's maybe in the generations of the family that just they're seeking, they're really seeking for something and not trying to just settle for easy answers. And, the people I've talked to from the People's Temple that are survivors, they are remarkably intelligent and well-spoken and seem to have this very nuanced kind of love and acceptance for people in the world. And there's just things at the core. Linda she was a social worker, she was in the People's Temple. It's kind of strange to talk about some of the good that they might have done, but they were helping heroin addicts and things like that. And, she probably thought she was doing a lot of good in the world, and it was the wrong track, and it was putting too much faith in, one man. So.
And, if you really believe that everything good and beautiful is crashing around you, then maybe it's easier to do something, as extreme. I don't know if you know the letter of Magda Goebbels, right at the end of the Second World War. Joseph Goebbels, of course, was Hitler's right-hand man. Magda was his wife, and she killed her, was it 4 or 5 children before committing suicide. And you read her letter, and you don't feel like you're reading the words of a mad woman. You don't feel like you're reading the words of a psycho. You feel like you're reading the words of a person who, really believed, it's unfathomable, but who really believed somehow that this world that Hitler wanted to build was a beautiful thing that was crashing all around her. And so the only reasonable thing to do is to exit and to take my kids with me. That's, and I've told my students, it would be a lot easier if you read this letter from Magda Goebbels and walked away from it saying that lady was crazy. But you read the letter, and what I sense from it is heartbreak, disillusionment. We were building this beautiful thing, and now it's all falling apart. And I wonder if a person just gets, as you said, Sharon was so committed. The word zealot is used, and she's listening to this on the radio. Everything she believes in is crashing around her.
This is such a good point. Today I'm going to go read that letter. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
I'd even go back to your previous question. There's my mom, there was such a underlying fear that seemed to motivate a lot, her joining the LDS church, prior to that, when she's reading the Bible and the story about Satan, she writes in her memoirs how terrifying that was. She ran down the street to find a friend to comfort her. And the fear, if that was also, if I see that in my mom and maybe wonder if Sharon was motivated that same way. She was terrified, I think, of the fascists, that, Jim Jones was constantly, putting this fear in them. And, I don't think it's a stretch to say he was intentionally trying to push that button with them. And so that is one interpretation, is that she knew that the police were going to be coming, the military, the U.S. military would be coming, and picturing her kids, in camps and whatever she was picturing. Yeah. And on top of what you're saying, that she probably thought that she was working so hard to build this beautiful thing and to have, an alternative to the ugliness in the world. That's a great point.
Even as you say that, that the military is coming to get us, as Jones said, the mercenaries are in the jungle and they're going to come get us. My heart breaks, because I've talked to a good number of the military who went to Jonestown to deal with the aftermath. And their hearts break over what they saw. And it's just one of those things. You wish you could go back to Sharon and say, no, the military is coming, but they're not coming to hurt you. Right. In fact, the very first military who got to Jonestown, a guy named David Netterville, very first American Special Forces who set his foot in Jonestown, he thought he was going into a firefight, but the point was to rescue people. The first U.S. military who went down there, they thought they were going on a rescue mission. They didn't think, they weren't going down there to hurt anybody. They were going down there to rescue people. And to their own, whatever the right word is, shock, what they thought was a rescue mission turns into a cleanup mission. And hearing you say that, I've heard that before, and I've actually talked to these guys before, and to these military folks, and said, Jim Jones is saying the military is coming to get us. He turned out to be right, but in the exact opposite way. What a tragedy.
Yeah.
But, but she probably believed it, right? People get sucked into this stuff. And I'm imagining this as she's listening to this on the radio. Her world is completely coming unglued. And she believes, as you say, as Jim Jones has been saying, they're coming to get us. And they're going to take us out. So we should do the honorable thing and take ourselves out and not let them take us out. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, finding your project, seeing, the links to the military remembrance. That's another area I'd never even thought about, that, people going into that scene, that horrible scene, and the impact on them and how these things echo, over time and through generations.
Yeah.
And then, speaking more on the mindset of it, the way that I hear or have read the orders that Sharon got from Jim over the radio from Jonestown was to get the knives. They didn't have cyanide there. They got knives, and was to go and kill their enemies at the hotel. I think it was the Pegasus Hotel in Georgetown.
Oh, yeah.
Where the Concerned Relatives group had gone down with Congressman Ryan. Sherwin Harris, that's Leanne's dad, was there. And from what I understand, he met with them that day. They had dinner, earlier that day.
With Sharon.
Yeah.
Earlier that day.
He got to see his daughter that day. But they're in their head, in their mind, those were their enemies that were there and were there to harm them and to, take their kids away or whatever, right? Those things would be. So you're right. It's very complicated what was in their mindset, but the contrast of what you're describing with the military people that you've met with. Yeah, that is very tragic.
Yeah. Well, you're right. And you talk about, the ripples, and that's why I think this conversation is important, because you see, I think Shakespeare has this phrase, I don't have it exactly, but the good that men do is buried with them, but the evil they do lives on. I think that's too pessimistic. I think, the good people do does live on, but there's no question that the evil does as well. And this story, although I think, just realistically, as you've said, a lot of people don't know where the phrase, don't drink the Kool-Aid comes from, So I fear that this story is slipping from historical memory, but at the same time, it continues to have ripple effects in the family, especially I think in the family members. The longer I've spent thinking and reading about Jonestown People's Temple, talking to people who have some connection to it, the less interest I have in Jim Jones and the more interest I have in the people within the movement. You said you've talked to survivors. I have too. I'm sure you've talked to many more, and you're able to talk to them in a different, more connected way. But I've found what you found. These are people I'd be glad to have as neighbors. I think these are people who, everybody's messed up, but these are people who had good motivations, people who wanted to do good in the world. You rightly say the People's Temple did a lot of good in the world. I think one of the things that's really hard to wrap the mind around, and I'm not able to, but I've heard Jonestown people say, survivors say, and it's kind of hard to say, despite 913 dead in a mass murder suicide. It's really hard, that's a big despite. Yeah. But despite that, there was something really beautiful. And you hear survivors say that, and and you hear folks who are survivors of Jonestown say, when Jim Jones wasn't there, it was actually a pretty cool place. But when he would show up, people would get stressed out. And so anyway, what I'm doing is I'm resonating with what you're saying, is that these are people. These are people. Yeah, these weren't automatons. They may have had, maybe certain personality traits or something, but these are just like folks that we meet, that we come across at the store, who live in our neighborhoods, who had the same desires and aspirations as everyone else. But for certain historical, contextual reasons, they got pulled into this particular thing, but they're not fundamentally different from us, That's my sense.
When you talk to survivors, when you read their words, first of all, their willingness to share and be as honest as they are, it's almost unflinching honesty of, yeah, we were part of something terrible. But now they're 42 years plus, and if you include all their experience, the time leading up to November 18th in 78. And they've worked through survivor's guilt and other types of guilt. And then the view that you're describing of where there was also beauty there and good things they were doing and the human connections that they were making with people. And then the loss of those people in a thing that they took part in and actively took part in. They're on the other side of that. And most of us don't know what that's like. And I'm sure there's a spectrum of it, but there's also a very strong theme of, taking accountability, trying to see some kind of learning experience or good, or sharing their story. And that's, I guess that's what I'm trying to connect myself to and my actions to, and why I wanted to dig into this more is, I guess the mantle kind of falls to me for progressing the story of my cousins in particular, which also involves the story of Sharon and Linda, just to keep it going. I think too that the circles of people that even know about Jonestown anymore is a circle that's getting smaller. Within that circle, the circle of people that understand a little more of what led up to that and how a lot of them were very, very good people trying to do good. But then, these circles just keep closing down. Do people know about Georgetown? And do they know that when they see, I guess, I'm not sure the right way to say this, but, and so I want to be careful, but with, when you see the overall number of people that died that day in Guyana, the number is important and that says something. It's a gigantic tragedy, but the individual stories and the individual lives and specifically the individual deaths of every single person there is a very important story in itself. And, the number doesn't really represent in that same sense what happened with my family members. And that circle sometimes, to me, it sometimes feels like maybe I'm the only one thinking about it anymore.
About what happens in Georgetown rather than Jonestown itself. Yeah, it's true, because I think a lot of folks who know about the general story, they know about Jonestown, but they don't know about what also happens in Georgetown, where your aunt was, and what happened there.
Definitely. And the term suicide, and suicide and murder, and I think people that have studied, Jonestown a lot in the massacre can see that it doesn't really fit cleanly into either of those definitions in all of the cases.
Yeah.
But when you look specifically at what my aunt did and the way that the kids died, that's just its own thing as well, that there's lessons to be learned from that. I would just, I'd encourage people, it's really easy with Google. If you just look up, the names, Martin Amos, Krista Amos, her first name is Wayborn, Krista Amos, Leanne Harris, and if you put in that Google search, the San Diego State University Remembrance, or just SDSU, they have a really cool page where there's a collection under their name specifically of remembrances about them. And, it's a very, very tough read. But if you go to that same site and you look for Stephen's essay about what happened that day, it's a bit broader. It speaks to really, the basketball tournament and everything and what's going on in his head.
Right.
But that's a very good, clear telling of what happened that day. And so, again, I just really want to help, get that story out there and have people understand what happened, see them as, people, children, humans. And then also, like I say, there's things to learn from, what happened that day. When we first, put our foot in the door on a movement, we don't always understand what's going to happen at the end of it. But we have history. We have these stories. We have things that are happening in today's world, where, people get kind of, they get kind of hooked maybe on the adrenaline rush of, this is new and exciting, and they don't look so far down the road. So, I think, I don't want to tell people what to do or try to go so high road with it, but there needs to be something that comes from it. And I think that could be something good.